It's the Criterion. It's the Criterion. Criterion. N. Project.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Criterion Project. I am Conrado Falco, and with me, as always, is the wonderful Rachel Wagner. Rachel, how you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. So good to be here.
That's right. Today, we're going to talk about Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love. But before we do that, we have a couple of things that we want to share with you. First of all, we want to thank you for listening to our podcast, and we would like to ask you, if you enjoy the conversation, to please leave us a review on iTunes. That would really help us spread the word and, do good things for the podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter at Criterion Pod. And if you want to send us an email, we would love to hear from you. And our email is acriterionproject@gmail.com. We have a new segment of the show coming up later, and we would really love to hear some responses to that once we get to it. But before we do, Rachel, last time we were talking about the Sundance Film Festival, and you were giving us some of your favorite and least favorite movies that you had seen, but you were not done with the festival. So what can you tell us about what happened since last time we recorded?
Yes. So I had it was about midway through the festival that we talked. And the one that I most enjoyed that I didn't talk about last time is a film called Dick Johnson is Dead. And it's a documentary that's going to be on Netflix. So you can look out for it. Director Kirsten Johnson. What she did is she was dealing with her father becoming older. And so she decided to kind of basically make a eulogy for her dad, even though he was still alive, and kind of explore the idea of grieving and loss. And it's so sweet. I mean, her dad is the best person. I loved her dad so much. And
Wow.
And I loved her. First of all, she was great for the festival. I mean, she gave an amazing Q&A where she actually came down into the crowd with the mic and was answering all these questions. She was so great. But aside from that, I really loved it. Maybe part of it is because I lost both my grandmas last year. And so I don't have any more of my grandparents living, and I just loved her dad so much. He was so great, and I love things about sort of. He wasn't really a curmudgeonly old man, but I had such a close relationship to my grandpa, to one of my grandpas, and so I love things about grandpas.
That's great. This is a real Criterion pick, I have to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kristen Johnson, her first movie, Camera Person, which is she's been working as a cinematographer, I believe, in documentaries for a while. And her first movie was this thing called Camera Person, in which she used footage from all the stuff that she had been working on in the past, a kind of a diary. Oh. And that's already in the Criterion collection. So, her follow-up, Dick Johnson is Dead, is, it's got raves from critics, for the very highbrow critics of, film comment and whatever. Yeah. So you are in very fancy company.
Ooh. That's interesting. I'll have to watch it because I just loved her and I loved the movie. And then also Palm Springs, really cute, clever idea. Krista Milioti, who was the mother on How I Met Your Mother, and I hated the ending of that show so much. So I've always felt kind of like, how could they do you so wrong? So I was really excited to see her in this. And Andy Samberg is also in it, and it's a time loop movie where they get stuck living the same day over and over again. And it was really charming, very cute. I think that people will really love it. And then finally, the other one I'll mention, there's two I'll mention that are very, very Criterion-y.
Okay.
9 Days is a really clever artsy movie that to me worked. And it's about the world. It's set before it's this kind of way station for before people come down to Earth, and they have 9 days to kind of prove that they are worthy or they are right to come down to Earth. And you have Winston Duke playing this man who gets to make this decision of who gets to come, and he's kind of depressed because one of his choices just committed suicide, and he can't understand why she would do that. And I thought it was really good. I thought all the acting had a great cast, and it was just kind of a clever. It almost felt like a Corrida movie to me. So I enjoyed it. Then also definitely very Criterion is the movie Tesla, with Ethan Hawke playing Nikola Tesla. But this is a very weird movie, where they bring in a lot of, it's period piece, but they break the fourth wall a lot, and they have these modern jokes. Like you'll see all of a sudden Thomas Edison has an iPhone, and there's a whole scene where Tesla sings karaoke to Tears.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
Tears from Heaven.
Yeah, it's a weird movie, but I enjoyed it, and so yeah.
That sounds really cool. The director, I'm not so surprised. Director Michael Almereyda, he made a version of Hamlet with Ethan Hawke that took place in modern day back in 2000.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was him. And his latest movie was called Experimenter, and it had a lot of those touches too. It was about the Milgram experiment. And Peter Sarsgaard played Milgram, and they had like all these weird touches, like an elephant that went to the screen and stuff like that. So it seems to be his style, and I'm excited to see this because I love Ethan Hawke.
He's great in it, and he was loving it up at Sundance. He was his Instagram was very entertaining.
Yeah, well, he seems like he's a Sundance type of guy. He's in his element there.
So I enjoyed it. I still said I'm not sure how much of it is sort of Sundance head at that point, Jesus, like that. But it was kooky, it was weird, it was different. I liked it. So there's some other things, but you can check out on rachelsreviews.net for my reviews of everything that I watched, if you want to learn more.
You can also listen to a previous episode where Rachel talks about a lot of the movies that she saw at Sundance, about 11 or so.
Right.
And that was a really fun conversation.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. All right. Before we get into the movie, what about the Criterion channel? Have you watched anything there lately that you want to recommend or talk about? Yes.
So I rewatched one of my favorite documentaries from director Errol Morris, who I love, called Gates of Heaven. And this I first found out about it from Siskel and Ebert, because I was an avid devotee of their show, and they loved this movie. It was one of Roger Ebert's favorite movies ever, and it's a really, really great documentary where he interviews the people behind this pet cemetery in Los Angeles, and it's really just these people just sort of talking about their life philosophies and what and their sort of their theories on death and the afterlife, and all these things. And also there's the people who own one of the cemeteries. They have sort of their business philosophies. There's a father and a son, and they're great and hilarious and also touching and sweet. And he just kind of would let people just sort of go off and just ramble, and there's just so many. It's a very quotable movie. It's a really charming movie. I love it. I think it's so good. So I highly recommend it if you're open to quirky, creative documentaries.
Wow, wonderful. I have never seen it actually. So and everything you're saying makes it really even more excited to see it than I was before. I watched also a movie that I think also fits into the quirky kind of genre. It's called Zazie in the Metro, or like the French title is Zazie dans le métro, I think. but it's translated as Sassy at the Metro, and it's a movie from 1960 directed by Louis Malle. It's a French movie, as you might imagine, and it's one of the, I guess it's a little bit debated whether or not it fits into French New Wave, but it does have that style. First of all, it's a totally crazy, bonkers movie. I don't know, have you ever heard of this movie before, Rachel?
I don't think I have.
Okay, so it's about this little girl who goes on her mom takes her to Paris, but her mom has something to do over the weekend, so she leaves her with an uncle, and this uncle is this like very like kind of French dandy, stuffy kind of guy, and this little girl Sazie, she's like a total firecracker. You know, she's like the kid who like won't sit still. She just wants to go on the metro, but the metro is closed because there's a strike, and then it's basically just going around Paris for like 90 minutes, wrecking havoc. It's like totally anarchic movie. It's like as if a cartoon, like a Looney Tunes cartoon, had become a movie, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really crazy. It's very funny at parts. Ooh. It might be a little too anarchic and too energetic for some people, but I was really impressed. I was really into how it committed to being crazy and cartoony. There's a scene in which Sazie is followed by this guy who, because she runs away from her uncle, and then this guy finds her in the street who's kind of like I don't remember if he's a police officer. He's just a guy who wants to return her to the uncle, and it's something right out of Looney Tunes. This is montage in which Sazie like basically like gives him some dynamite and like has him run over by a car and things like that, and it's so crazy and funny. And there's this other scene in which they go up the Eiffel Tower and they're doing these crazy stunts that I almost had a heart attack because I'm afraid of heights. And these people were just climbing on the Eiffel Tower, and you could see like you could see how high up they were, and they were like no like nets, no anything. I was about to pass out. It was but it's so much fun, and it's truly, truly crazy.
Yeah.
Movie.
What's it called again?
So it's on the Criterion channel. It's Sazie dans le métro. And it's called Sazie in the Metro or Sazie at the Metro. They usually just do the French name, I think, because my guess is that it never actually got a commercial release in the US, and that's why it goes by the French name. Mm-hmm. It was under the family matinee section. So if you go there, you'll find it. Yeah, it's under Sazie dans le Metro on the channel.
That sounds good. Hey, is it old or
1960?
Modern? Oh, 1960. Okay, cool. Yeah. That sounds really good. It sounds nerve-wracking, but that sounds good.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Cool.
All right. Well, let's get into it. Let's talk about Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love.
Yes.
So I guess a little context for this movie. Released in 2000, went to the Cannes Film Festival where it had its premiere. It got an award for Best Actor for Tony Leung, who plays Mr. Chow. And then it became a pretty big hit for Wong Kar-wai. He was kind of known as a sort of art house director at that point, but this was his biggest hit yet. And it was critically beloved. It was put on a lot of best of the decade lists and best of the year lists. And I think it's regarded one of the very best movies of the 21st century. So Rachel, why don't you give us a little bit of what you thought about the movie?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. And you had made the comparison to A Brief Encounter. The big difference between it and A Brief Encounter is that you have they actually show and deal with their spouses as like a plot element, as opposed to this, which you never see them. And I don't know, I'm still sort of pondering that choice. I know it's interesting. I'm curious for your thoughts about that. But yeah, I mean, I think that this is a very slick and a very stylish movie. And I think that it helps it a lot, the fact that it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's only 98 minutes. And I think that really helps just keep it kind of tight. And you're able to just focus on these characters, because there's not a ton of plot really in the movie. And so I think that that helps a lot. I really enjoyed it, and talk about some other things that I liked about it. But yeah, overall, I did enjoy it.
So let's get into the plot a little bit then. Movie takes place in 1962 in Hong Kong, and it's a romance movie. It's basically like Brief Encounter. It's the story of these two married people who are neighbors, and they discover that their spouses are having an affair with each other, and so they they want to deal with this, and in order to deal, they come up with this idea of like kind of like play acting to try to figure out how their spouses might have fallen in love, but then of course by doing it they kind of fall in love together. And this makes it sound a little, I think, a little simpler than it actually is, because like you say, the style of the movie, I feel like in this case we're talking about a movie where the style is the movie almost, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's so stylish. The cinematography by Christopher Doyle and Mark Lee Ping Bin is like these like very intense colors, like all red and green and yellow. Yeah, what do you think of that? I feel like it's kind of like.
Yeah, I think that's where it really stands out. And one thing I was very interested in is particularly the music. I don't know why it's the first time that I've ever seen a foreign film, an international film, if you want to say it, an international film that uses another language than the music from another language in their film. And I'm sure it's happens a bunch, but I don't know. That was just really interesting that sort of the main
the main theme
was this Quizás.
Yeah, Nat King Cole. There's like one or quizás, and then there's the other. There's another Spanish Nat King Cole song that they use, I think.
Yeah, and so I thought that was really interesting, and it's a very, very sleek and very stylish song, and it just kind of added this layer to me that I thought was interesting.
That is a very Wong Kar-wai thing to do. I don't know if you're familiar with some of his other movies. He did, but I'm thinking of like the movie like Chungking Express from the 90s, which was kind of like his big breakthrough. And in that movie, he also like kind of like chooses these pieces of music and he like uses them over and over again. It almost like a motif, right? In this, in The Mood for Love, it's the Nat King Cole. In that movie, there's the California Dreaming by the Mamas and the Papas, that there's this character who just keeps listening to that song over and over again. And it's just like this, I think he's just this guy, like, I don't know if you saw some of the interviews that they have up in the Criterion channel with him, but there's this guy who like, he's always wearing sunglasses. He like, all of his movies are about like these solitary, like lonely people in Hong Kong who like fall in love, but like it doesn't work out and things like that. So he's got that very kind of like, I don't know, he's like a romantic, cool guy, I would say. I don't know how to describe his stuff.
I wonder who would be the I mean, in a way it kind of reminded me a little bit of this, recent Once a Time in Hollywood a little bit, just that it's kind of following these characters and it's not like super plot heavy, but it's just kind of slick and about just these characters, and in that case it's about friendship, but in this it's about a romance. But I don't know,
I mean, it's interesting because he came around the same time as Tarantino in the 90s, and actually Tarantino was kind of a big supporter of Chungking Express and of getting the movie released in the US. So I think for a while in the 90s, especially, the two were very associated, right? Like a lot of people, I feel like, were thinking of him as kind of like a Tarantino of Asia, even though his movies are not nearly as violent, and they're very different in style in many ways, right? They're mostly romances, which Tarantino doesn't do very much,
right?
And they're and they're a different speed, but
the one part that I didn't like as much is I felt like the sort of the comic relief of like various friends and people he worked with and stuff like that. It wasn't my favorite. That I mean, I guess you kind of need a breakup from the tension of their relationship, but I don't know. It wasn't my favorite, that part.
I can see that. I think what's interesting about those characters to me is that they, I think what makes the movie interesting, and I don't know how it is in Brief Encounter because I haven't seen it in so long, I barely remember it, but I think so they live in this apartment building, and one of the they are renting rooms in other people's apartments, right? From what I understand. That was a little bit confusing to me, but so the landlady in this house is one of the supporting characters, I think, that you're talking about, and the other is the guy that Mr. Chow, the main character, the main male character, works with, and what I thought was interesting is that these two that fall in love, they kind of like have this moral code, like we can't have a relationship because we are better than our spouses and we're not gonna cheat, right? That's kind of the vibe that I got. That like their spouses are having an affair with each other, but we are not. She tells him at one point, right? We're not gonna be like them. Like we're not going to like have an affair because we're married and we know that we have this moral code. And what I thought was interesting is that the moral code is not like the society is making them do it. It's kind of like coming from them because everyone around them is having affairs, right? Like the woman, Mrs. Chan, played by Maggie Cheung, the main female character, her boss is having an affair and she's his secretary and she's basically buying gifts for the woman that his boss is sleeping with, right, as part of her job. And then Mr. Chow, his co-worker, is also talking about having affairs and like going to the brothel or whatever, right? So I think it's very interesting that everyone around them is like very comfortable with like just messing around, but these two, they have this sort of thing of like, we can't do it. Like we are respectable, good people, and we are going to do what's right. Which I think it's kind of like the, I don't want to say tragic, but you know, it's kind of like the tension and the kind of like bittersweet thing about this romance that kind of never happens fully.
Yeah, I mean, how do you feel about the fact that they don't ever really show the spouses?
I think it's an interesting choice. I mean, I'm curious to see how you feel about it because you have seen Brief Encounter more recently, and you seem to have more thoughts about it than I do. To be honest, I hadn't really thought of it as such a important choice, but now that you mention it, I am starting to wonder about that. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I that's why I say I think this works because it is 98 minutes. That it keeps it as kind of this. It keeps you from getting kind of frustrated on that account. You know, I think that can be really smart in movies when they don't allow you to really kind of question things in that way because if they're tightly edited enough, you just keep going with the story. But I do think it kind of adds a layer on the other hand that because it just makes it messier the more when you get to see the other people involved, you know, in the situation. And you also kind of, you would learn more about both of their backstories of what led them to these, you know, these relationships, which then led to their relationship. You know, it could have allowed them to sort of explore themes of forgiveness and temptation, I guess, and things that they weren't really allowed to do because you didn't see that relationship, and so that you can't really forgive something that we haven't even seen. And where you do in Brief Encounter, you I don't know, it's actually quite different, the themes and the messages behind the different both movies, I think. And so I don't know, in some ways I kind of wish we had gotten to see them or at least have some kind of comparison between between the two, so you kind of understand. It would be interesting to see it. But on the other hand, I think it kind of works as this experiment.
Mm-hmm. I think, I guess about that choice, I would say it probably, if I had to justify it, I would probably go back to what I was saying before. I feel like the fact that we don't see the people, the spouses, the cheating spouses, maybe makes it even more like, I don't know. I feel like the movie is trying to be like, you two should get together, right? Like they're kind of like, because it's so beautiful to look at, and when they look together, the both of them, I don't know if you agree with me, I think they're gorgeous people, Tony Leung and Maggie Cheung, and they look so great, and she's wearing these amazing dresses, and he is so slick with his suit, and they're both like so I don't know, so yeah, so beautiful. They're like two movie stars, and the like everything is red and green, and it's like, you should be together, and like we have even removed your spouses from the picture so that you can get together, but there's something within themselves that keeps them apart, right? This thing of like something that is going on inside of their heads, and in the way they see the world, and who they see themselves as. Because I feel like a lot of the time, I guess that this happens in relationships. I see, not always, but people who, not always, but sometimes I feel like people stay together because of something that that has to do with a specific belief of who they want to be to the world, right? Like I always think of myself, not me specifically, but I'm just thinking of a person who might be like, I always thought that I would get married and I would never get divorced, and so I will not get divorced because then I won't be the person that I always wanted to be,
right?
And there isn't that flexibility, right? Like there isn't this, and I feel like that flexibility is kind of like the thing that you need in order to make a relationship work, even if, you know, just embracing that might even result in a better marriage and you won't even get divorced. But I don't know, I feel like that rigidity is interesting.
Yeah, I think so. It was interesting, in the Wikipedia they have a quote from the director saying that he was very influenced by Hitchcock's Vertigo making the film, and he compared Tony Leung's character to Jimmy Stewart's character in that film. And it says, the role of Tony in the film reminds me of Jimmy Stewart's in Vertigo. There is a dark side to his character. I think it's very interesting that most of the audience prefers to think that this is a very innocent relationship. These are the good guys because their spouses are the first ones to be unfaithful, and they refuse to be. Nobody sees any darkness in these characters, and yet they are meeting in secret to act out fictitious scenarios of confronting their spouses and of having an affair. I think this happens because the face of Tony Leung is so sympathetic. Just imagine if it was John Malkovich playing the role. You would think, this guy is really weird. It's the same in Vertigo. Everybody thinks Jimmy Stewart is a nice guy, so nobody thinks that his character is actually very sick.
That's very interesting. You know what's also interesting about this is that there's actually a sequel to In the Mood for Love, called 2046, which is the number of the room in the hotel room in which he goes, and I feel like in that scene, and he kind of wants to basically sleep with Mrs. Chan, but then she comes and then she's like, no, we're not going to be like them, and they don't do anything. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. But in the sequel, apparently, which I have never seen, but now I'm really curious to see, it focuses on Mr. Chow and kind of what happens with him after this affair. And apparently, I think he gets divorced from his wife, because we see him at the end of this movie going to Singapore and then to these other countries. So I'm wondering to see what happens there, and how this theory of Mr. Chow as this kind of not so nice guy continues in that sequel.
And you can really get a long way with casting. I mean, we've seen it with Tom Hanks, in that it's almost impossible to dislike a character. You can play gangster, you can play, kind of things. It's Tom Hanks. So you just have a hard time disliking him.
Yeah. And we were talking about it in the shop around the corner with Jimmy Stewart again, right? Like how that scene in the restaurant, speaking of Tom Hanks and You've Got Mail and Jimmy Stewart, how they pull off those scenes that could come off as very off-putting if a different actor were playing them, right?
it's similar to Vertigo, where it's kind of a mystery, like you get these clues and along with the character, and you have a theme of kind of madness in that one as well. But I don't know. I feel like with this, it's also we just keep getting kind of clues to these people throughout the film. And so I when you said that, I was like, yeah, I can really see that. Like both films feel very sleek to me, and very well packaged, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting.
Great. I think it's probably time to get into our questions.
Yes.
So the first question that we have is, what do you think makes In the Mood for Love a Criterion Collection movie?
I definitely think the style. It's just it's a very stylish, very the great production design, great the way it uses music, the editing. I don't know. I just think altogether it feels very it feels like an auteur type film.
Totally. I agree with that. I think Wong Kar-wai, he just has such a particular way of making movies. His style, like you're saying, but also something we didn't talk about is that he famously doesn't write a script for his movies. He just gets an idea, gets actors, and he starts shooting. And his movies sometimes take multiple years to finish because he just keeps improvising and doing more and more shooting until he finally comes up with a movie that he likes. And that is that sounds to me like a very, very nerve-wracking way to work. And obviously that's happened with him a lot, is that sometimes he starts making one movie and then he ends up making 2 or 3 out of the one shoot. But other times, and especially in recent years, it's been a long time since he's had a movie, since The Grandmaster, which he did in 2013, I think. And it's because his shoots go on for so long and it takes him so long to figure out what the movie actually is. But that is also a very unique thing that not a lot of directors do. So he definitely stands out, as a one of a kind guy.
Huh. Yeah, that is interesting. So yeah, I think it definitely feels very Criterion worthy.
And the second question is, where do you think this ranks in the pretentious scale? So the pretentious scale will tell us if how pretentious a movie is and whether it deserves to be pretentious.
Yeah, I don't think it's that pretentious. I think that, I mean, there's definitely some artistry before it, but nothing that's not that accessible. I mean, I feel like it's pretty accessible. But I know I gave it a 6. I didn't feel like it was too bad.
I can feel it. I might go a little higher, actually. I think, I love the movie, but I do think it's quite a bit, I don't know. I think something about this whole style over substance thing can go in both directions, right? You can have someone like a Zack Snyder or a Michael Bay, which is all like flashy action and not very pretentious at all. It's just style for style's sake in one direction. Right. And then you can have something like this, which is kind of like, let me tell you something very emotional and very profound with my style, right? Which I think it's on the more pretentious end of the scale, which is probably where I put this. But like you say, it's a very relatively easy to follow movie. There's not a lot of plot. It's, you get the idea. We've seen movies about people falling in love and having affairs. So I'll probably go like a 8 or so.
Okay, good. Very good.
Great. And now I guess it's time to reveal our new segment, which is something we just came up with, and we'll see how it goes. It's called the remake game, which is in which we are each going to pitch an idea for how to remake the movie we're talking about. In this case, we're going to pitch a remake that I think a lot of people would be very pissed if it actually happened. But how would we do a remake of In the Mood for Love? Rachel, do you have an idea?
I am so excited about this idea. I think it's I love my idea. So what I would do, one of the things that really impressed me about the movie, like I said, was that was this sort of mixture of cultures with this Spanish music with this in this Chinese setting. And so what I would do is kind of embrace that Spanish side to try to do something different, because you don't want to just make the same movie again. And so I'm a little nervous about this, just because the last time that Jennifer Lopez made a remake of a
Asian
Japanese
romance,
film,
yeah.
Shall We Dance, I really disliked that movie. I love the original. But anyway, but here's my pitch. So what you do is you would have it set in Mexico, and you would have Jennifer Lopez and Antonio Banderas playing the two leads. And yeah, which I think they'd have great chemistry. They're pretty close in age, I think. And I think that they could totally pull it off and do a good job. And if we wanted to be really crazy and really try something different, I think you could make this movie into a musical.
Oh, Rachel.
Yes.
Okay.
I think you could get the Lopez's, who haven't done, they've finished all their Disney stuff. They don't have a big project, so it's like perfect time. And I think they could totally, I think that they have definitely the chops to do it. And I think that it would be fun to see them do something more adult after all this Disney for so long.
Yes.
And obviously J-Lo can sing, and Antonio
can sing too.
Yeah, he was in Evita, so hey, why not? And I just think it could be really cool.
Wow. Okay. I'm really loving this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I would love to see that movie, actually. Someone make that happen.
Yeah, it would be so good. I would love it. And the director I would have Patricia Riggin do the directing. She did a movie called Under the Same Moon a few years ago about these this mother and son, the immigrants who are separated, and it's a really sweet, lovely little movie, and I think that she would do a good job, and so it would be great. Just do it.
Wow. Okay. Wow. I think that's a great idea, actually. Okay. Well, my idea, we'll see. Maybe it's not, now I don't feel like it's not as exciting, but I will stand by it. My idea is, I think, so this whole idea of them being neighbors made me think of like, where would you put it in an American remake? And I think you can do it like in New York City, and you can have like in a neighborhood that is being like gentrified, So like this new family moves into the building, and you have a guy who's been living there for a long time, and suddenly these people who are not from the neighborhood move in, and he's kind of like grumpy about it, but then he kind of falls in love with the wife of the family. And I think it should be played by Oscar Isaac, would be the guy who's been living there, in that mostly Latino neighborhood. And the family moves in, and the wife is Carey Mulligan, who played his girlfriend or wife. I think she played his wife in the movie Drive with Ryan Gosling. So I think now it would be interesting to, instead of them being the married ones, have them reunite as the ones who are like falling in love and potentially cheating on their spouses. And in terms of the director, I thought you want someone who has a lot of style, who is interested in romance, and who knows a lot about like New York City and the neighborhoods in the city and gentrification and all that thing. So I thought, why not reunite Carey Mulligan with her director from the movie Mudbound, and that would be the great Dee Rees, who I think is pretty sure she's from Brooklyn, and she's made movies about New York, and she's worked wonderfully with Carey Mulligan in the past, and I would love to see what a Dee Rees romance would look like. So that is my pitch.
Yeah, I think I think we could green light. I think it's interesting they both went kind of the Latin route.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. Like the Nat King Cole sort of like, Spanish music kind of like subliminally got into my head also.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's interesting. So I'm excited about this new segment. And if you are listening, let us know your pitches. That would be really fun. I'd love that.
Absolutely. If anyone emails us their pitch or tweeted us their pitch, I will promise we will read it in the next episode.
Okay. Yeah, that would be fun. I'd love that. So
yeah,
and then let us know what you think of our pitches too.
Yeah, should we do a poll of which pitch is the better pitch? I feel like I don't know. This Antonio Jennifer Lopez combos has me scared that you're gonna run away with both. So
I was so excited as I was coming out with like, ooh, and then and this is something that this was such a brilliant idea to add because I do this all the time on the Hallmarkies podcast. I'm always coming up with pitches. It's my favorite thing.
Oh, great. Perfect.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this then.
Yes.
But yeah, let us know about your pitches and let us know about anything else you want to say. If you've seen In the Mood for Love, if you have any movies that you want us to cover on the podcast, send us an email, tweet at us. You know where to find us as a podcast. On Twitter, we're at Criterion Pod, like we said. On email, it's acriterionproject@gmail.com. Yeah. Rachel, if people want to talk to you directly because they want to scream at you about your opinion, where can they find you?
Well, wait, before we got to talk about the next movie.
Oh, yes, absolutely. What do we have in store for next time?
Yeah. So for our next episode, we are going to talk about the Black Stallion. And this is, I've actually never seen it and I've really wanted to see it. It's been, I've often heard it be called one of the great family films ever made. It was made in 1979 and it's based on a book about this horse and so I'm looking forward to it. It's supposed to be really beautiful, directed by Carol Ballard, and it stars Terry Garr, and I think that
Mickey Rooney's in it.
Yeah, Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney got an Academy Award nomination or something like that for it. Produced by Francis Ford Coppola. So I'm really looking forward to finally watching this one.
Yeah, it's definitely a very, I think it's a movie that got a lot of praise back when it came out and was a big deal. And it kind of has disappeared a little bit, right? I don't see a lot of people talking about it anymore, but definitely beloved by those who have seen it from what I can tell.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to dive into it.
Yeah, I heard a lot when Pete's Dragon came out. I heard a lot of comparisons.
That's right.
With that movie with the Black Stallion. So I'm really looking forward to seeing it.
I'm really excited because I love Pete's Dragon.
Me too.
So that's gonna be fun. All right. So. Okay, Rachel. Now, please stop avoiding the issue. If people want to email you to scream at you, where can they do that?
Yes. So you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So definitely check that out. And at rachelsreviews.net, you can find all of my reviews. And so if you want to contact the podcast, you can go to Criterion Pod on Twitter and leave us your thoughts on there. We would love to hear that. And then you can send us email at criterionproject@gmail.com. So definitely check that out.
Totally. Leave us a review on iTunes as well if you're so inclined. If you want to find me personally, you can go on Twitter at Coco Hits New York is my handle. We want to thank Michael Lorette for doing our beautiful theme music.
Yeah.
And with that, I think that's it for this episode.
Yes. All right. We will talk again in a couple weeks.
Quizás,
Bye, everybody.
Quizás.
Yes.